Start in the Middle East, where the U.S. and Israel is at war with Iran. That war is escalating as it enters its third day. The Iranian regime is responding to strikes from the U.S. and Israel following the death of its supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Iran has also conducted drone and missile strikes on at least 9 other countries in the region. Earlier this morning, the Pentagon gave an update on the U.S. operation.
The mission of Operation Epic Fury is laser focused. Destroy Iranian offensive missiles, destroy Iranian missile production, destroy their navy and other security infrastructure, and they will never have nuclear weapons. We're hitting them surgically, overwhelmingly, and unapologetically. We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it. If you kill Americans, if you threaten Americans anywhere on earth, we will hunt you down without apology and without hesitation, and we will kill you.
For more on this, CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand is at the White House. Natalie, the U.S. and Iran have been, of course, holding negotiations for weeks. They were in Geneva last week, and the readout from the Omanis, who were basically the intermediaries, is that significant progress was being made. But the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, said that Tehran was really just stalling through those diplomatic talks. Break down what the rationale here is for these U.S. and Israeli strikes.
Yeah, Secretary Hegseth in those comments this morning said that President Trump and the administration were essentially bending over backwards for diplomacy, in his words, because, as you noted, there was this active diplomacy underway with technical talks scheduled actually for this week in Vienna with the UN nuclear watchdog. So those talks were very much active, even as President Trump signaled to reporters on Friday that he was not happy with the way things were going, signaling he didn't feel like Iran was budging. And Secretary Hegseth, in his new comments, essentially accused Iran of stalling and saying that they were, quote, lying their way to a nuclear bomb. Now, we also know that the administration was very concerned with Iran's ballistic missile program. That was a concern voiced by Israel as well. And the president talking about Iran developing long-range missiles that could threaten allies in Europe, troops overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland, he said. Now, note that a Defense Intelligence Agency assessment last year said Iran could develop a long-range missile by 2035 if it chooses to pursue it. So lawmakers who are critical of this operation are questioning the administration's use of the word imminent and asking for more information. But really, if you take a bigger picture look, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth today also talking about decades of Iran posing threats and deadly attacks going back to 50 years ago in their comments, and talking about trying to eliminate the threats from Iran. Take a listen to more of Secretary Hegseth today.
For 47 long years, the expansionist and Islamist regime in Tehran has waged a savage, one-sided war against America. They didn't always declare it openly, except for their constant chants of death to America. They did it through the blood of our people. Car bombs in Beirut, rocket attacks on our ships, murders at our embassies, roadside bombs in Iraq and Afghanistan, funded and armed by Iranian Quds Force and IRGC killers.
Now, notably, Secretary Hegseth, when pressed today, would not give a timeline for this operation. President Trump, in comments over the weekend, speaking to the Daily Mail, suggested that this could be 4 or so weeks. But Secretary Hegseth, again, wouldn't really put a time on this. He was also asked, are there U.S. boots on the ground in Iran? He said no, but then he went on to say that he wasn't going to tell the media, what they will or will not do. Secretary Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Caine, also honored the 4 service members who have been killed, and Caine warning that the U.S. could take additional losses, saying that the U.S. will work to minimize that, but that this is major combat. Adriana.
And Natalie, over the weekend, we were getting drips of information from the president, who was speaking to individual news outlets. He, of course, posted 2 pre-recorded videos on social media. But when can the public expect to hear from him at the White House podium?
Well, CBS News has learned that he will make some remarks at the top of an event scheduled for next hour at 11 a.m. It was a previously scheduled Medal of Honor event, so we are expecting to hear him for the first time live speaking about Iran because, as you noted, there were just these two pre-recorded video statements released over the weekend. Pool reporters were not in the room, did not have an opportunity to ask questions. And then, he had this series of phone calls with reporters, including CBS News's Bob Costa, but at times giving different information in those calls. For instance, telling Bob Costa that there were some good candidates potentially to take over in Iran following the supreme leader's death, but telling ABC News that some of those candidates were killed in the operation. So a lot of questions remain.
Yes, they do. Natalie, thank you so much. Lawmakers are set to vote this week on potentially reining in the president's war powers, or at least trying to, in response to the U.S. military action in Iran. It comes as the House and Senate are set to receive all-member briefings from top administration officials tomorrow. Let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns, who is on Capitol Hill this morning. Caitlin, what is the latest that we're hearing from lawmakers on their war powers vote? What does it expect to do, and how many do they think they have the votes?
Well, Adriana, there has long been a push for Congress to exercise some authority here, and there's been a push in the House and the Senate to push a resolution to essentially say the administration can't act further without buy-in, weigh-in from Congress. Now, those bills in the House and the Senate are a huge uphill climb, and a lot will be riding on what lawmakers hear in these briefings that you mentioned. The briefings will start today, late this afternoon. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the CIA Director Ratcliffe will be up here on Capitol Hill briefing the members of the Gang of Eight. These are the top leadership positions in Congress, as well as the top leaders on the intelligence committees in both the House and the Senate. Those briefings begin today, and further briefings for the full Congress will take place starting tomorrow and throughout the week. So there are a lot of questions about the scope of this, given that the president himself has called this a war. There have already been 4 U.S. casualties. The president said that those, American heroes, in his words, could die in these efforts, and there is not a clear sense of how long this will last. So will there be more needed from Congress in terms of approving funds? That could, be some of the things that fall into this conversation. But I will tell you, there's some nuance here. You see Republicans, by and large, reinforcing the president. But Democrats are a little bit divided. There is a handful of Democrats in the House who said that they won't support this war powers resolution because it doesn't give enough flexibility to the executive to work here. So we're watching to see whether what we hear in these briefings and what the president himself says, if he does in fact elaborate on the overall scope and longevity of this operation, that will inform how lawmakers up here are thinking.
And Caitlin, we just spoke with the representative from Washington, Susan Del-Bene, and we asked her about this war powers resolution. Here's what she said.
Coming to Congress, asking for authorization if folks want to support a particular action because a case has been made, then people can vote yes. But there needs to be a vote. There needs to be, the president needs to come to Congress requesting an authorization for use of military force. And then people, based on the information that's provided, can make their decision. The president cannot move unilaterally. He is not a king. He cannot move without coming to Congress. And campaign talked about preventing and ending forever wars. Over and over and over, he has broken promises to the American people.
Even if this resolution were to pass, the president has to sign it. And where do the votes stand? Are Democrats all united against this or for this resolution?
That's right. The president would have to sign this, which likely wouldn't do. And it's notable that not all Democrats are on board. The congresswoman you just spoke to is representative of leadership, which has rallied around this. But there are some rank and file members who are not inclined to support this. The other item, Adriana, is to point out that Congress has long ceded its authority on war powers to the executive, predating Trump. I mean, going back over 20 years, there is a resolution that Congress passed in the days after 9/11 that gave broad authority to the executive to authorize strikes. And they have kind of relied on that for nearly 25 years, kind of referred back to that. Congress has declined to weigh in on some instances in previous administrations, hasn't had the chance to in others. So this does, present a different dynamic, given that the president, as I said, has been calling this a war, that the Secretary of Defense has been calling this a war. So the language here will be important in terms of how Congress assesses this going forward.
All right, Kaylee Huey-Burns, we know you're going to be on top of it from the Capitol. We appreciate it. CBS News national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us live in Tel Aviv, Israel. Charlie, your reporting has been tireless as air raid sirens have been screaming overhead. Thank you for bringing us all of the latest from the region. What are we learning this morning about how the U.S. operation got underway?
Yeah, so a briefing took place at the Pentagon. That is a rare thing in itself. But we heard from Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Caine, raising Caine, as President Trump calls him. And we kind of got the tick-tock of exactly how this initial wave of the attack against Iran unfolded. And we learned that there were Tomahawk cruise missiles that were launched from ships inside this region. And then there were B-2s or B-1 bombers, long-range bombers, that were part of that initial wave. And we've spoken to Israeli officials who told us that they were coordinating with the United States in the initial attacks that killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and that happened within the first wave of attacks, actually within the first hour of attacks there. So we're starting to get an understanding of when that happened. Chairman Caine, or General Caine, said that it was the H hour, like D-Day, H hour of when those attacks were launched, which gave us an indication of not just what was in place, because, Adriana, we've been talking about all of the assets that were in place, the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln that were there, and we now know that they've been actively engaged in this, and this is a little bit more about what he had to say.
More than 100 aircraft launched from land, sea, fighters, tankers, airborne early warning, electronic attack, bombers from the States, and unmanned platforms, forming a single synchronized wave. This was a daylight strike based on a trigger event conducted by the Israeli Defense Forces, enabled by the U.S. intelligence community. The first shooters at sea were Tomahawks unleashed by the United States Navy, closed in on Iranian naval forces, and began to conduct strikes across the southern flank in Iran. On the ground, forces fired precision standoff weapons, measured, deliberate, precise, and lethal. This was a massive, overwhelming attack across all domains of warfare, striking more than 1,000 targets in the first 24 hours.
So 1,000 targets within the past 24 hours, or in that range of the 24 hours. And yet, Iran has been able to retaliate, and we've seen that here. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is touring one of the locations that had been hit here in the past 24 hours. And it just gives you an indication, and we didn't really get an answer, of Iran's capability of firing back, even though that was brought up in that briefing, what Iran's capacity remains at this point, and looking forward to what they can do, not just to targets around here, places like the UAE, which we've seen targeted before, and Kuwait, and Israel, and where we're going to see this in the next 24, 48 hours ahead, or the week ahead.
Charlie, and you just named some of those other countries in the region that have been hit: UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain. 9 countries in all have been targeted by Iran. These countries primarily that have U.S. bases. And we're learning from the Israelis that they struck the head and killed the head of Hezbollah in Lebanon. So far, the Gulf states and countries in this region have had restraint. They have not gotten directly involved, except in defensive capacities. But what is the likelihood of this turning into a regional conflict?
Well, Adriana, in a way, this has already become a regional conflict, because the Iranians had warned that if the United States and Israel, to a degree, had attacked them, they would respond, they would retaliate, and not just against U.S. military targets in this region. And I have to keep reminding folks that we're looking at 30 to 40,000 U.S. personnel spread throughout the region in places like Kuwait, in places like Bahrain, which is the headquarters of the U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet, at Al Udeid, the largest U.S. Airfield in this region, which have all come under attack. But any of the U.S. allies, especially in the Gulf. Now, the Qataris have intercepted some of the missiles that were coming in. The Kuwaitis have done what they can in order to defend those regions as well. But the Iranians have just essentially fired on every single country within this region that they have reached to. And, you know, when we talk about Kuwait and we talk about Bahrain, those are within easy reach. They're just across the Persian Sea or the Persian Gulf of Iranian missiles. And here in Israel, we must, I'm not even exaggerating, we must have heard 20, 25 air raid sirens. And those things aren't just generalized. That means they're local. And so they're attacking all the time. The Israelis have been able to intercept the vast majority of those coming in.
Have the sirens slowed down, the attacks on Israel slowed down? I'm trying to get a sense of the pace of this from Iran, because eventually they will run out of missiles, and and their missile stockpile has been affected in this attack and in the attack over the summer.
Yeah, it's a good question, because when you're talking about what the Iranians have in terms of their capacity, it's not just what they have for their stockpiles, which has been estimated at between about 1,800 and 2,000. We haven't seen anything near that, and the Israeli intelligence haven't seen that. American intelligence haven't seen it. There's a lot, because any one of these are really capable, and they're big, and they do an incredible amount of damage. Witnessed that myself in the past couple of days when you walk around here. So they're fully capable, but they haven't seen the kind of numbers that they would have expected or what Iran is capable of. There are a couple of reasons for that. Either Iran is holding fire. They're keeping some of their missiles in a place where they could launch rather than a huge barrage. They're kind of cherry picking what they can do. Or that the Israelis and the Americans have been able to target those missile launches. In addition to the mobile launches, there are silos that have been identified. So there may be an element that those have already been targeted. And it's a good question, because it came up today as to what the capacity is and what the United States has been able to do to negotiate or to take those launchers out of the equation. That's an answer they weren't prepared to answer today.
We appreciate your context and your analysis, Charlie D'Agata, and your crew out there in Tel Aviv, Israel. Thank you so much. Inside Iran, many people fear what will come next following the death of Iran's supreme leader. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tayyab is in Oman with more.
Good morning. Well, the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, killed in a CIA-coordinated airstrike on his home and offices in Tehran at the age of 86, has thrown the future of the regime he spent decades reshaping into his own image into grave doubt.
Cheers erupted from Tehran's rooftop as word spread that the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was dead. On Sunday, tens of thousands of Islamic Republic loyalists then filled the streets to mourn the man who ruled Iran for nearly 4 decades, longer than any other ruler in the Middle East. At home, Khamenei's legacy is defined by ruthless control, including the brutal crackdown of dissent, like the mass killings of thousands of demonstrators in January. Despite a heavily sanctioned economy, he spent lavishly on the so-called axis of resistance, all bound by hostility towards the United States and Israel. Now killed by his arch-rivals, Khamenei has been elevated as a martyr by his supporters, a fate he appeared to anticipate. According to reports, last month, Khamenei issued detailed contingency orders in the event of his death, instructing senior military and government leaders to name up to 4 replacements. And under Iran's constitution, a 3-person leadership council has been put in power until a new supreme leader is formally named.
to be brave.
President Trump has urged Iranians to, quote, take over their government. But the president has not said who or what system should replace Khamenei. Some Iranians want this man, Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late ousted Shah. Speaking to 60 Minutes, Pahlavi thanked President Trump for what he called his intervention.
My message to President Trump is that I'm here to echo and join millions of my compatriots inside and outside of Iran to thank him for having done and having the courage to do what is not easy, but intervene.
But even as Pahlavi talks transition, President Trump is signaling a pivot, saying overnight Iran's current leaders, quote, want to talk. And while top security officials in Tehran deny that, it raises a fundamental question. Does the president still want regime change, or will he make a deal with what's left of the Iranian regime? Back to you.
CBS News Middle East reporter Kourney Kealy joins us now. Kourney, so glad you're here. You were based overseas in the Middle East for 10 years. You know these issues very well. Let's talk about the Iranian people. Where do they stand? Because from the U.S., we see a lot of images of protests, especially over the last few weeks, against the regime. But the Ayatollah is dead, and you see people coming out into the streets in mourning. Where do the majority of Iranians stand, and understanding the fact that people who might be critical of the government may not feel free to speak so?
Right. So what we're hearing right now is the Iranian regime, the Islamic regime is what they prefer to refer to, not even bringing the word Iranian into it. That's how different it is. There are SMS messages saying if you come out in the streets and protest or celebrate, as they did when the Ayatollah was killed, that's an act of treason. So there are explosions in Tehran. That news is coming to us from Starlinks, from the ways they're circumventing the blackout.
Starlink meaning the way that
the way they can get
to
the news
internet?
out into the satellite, yes. And then there's regular phone calls where people have to kind of speak in code. You know, a dear friend calling her husband saying, "My darling, are you well?" "Yes, I am." That just means we're fine here right now to calm everybody's nerves. But explosions are happening all over against the security forces in Tehran and other cities. So we are getting information out. We're getting information that the Islamic regime is putting in a new leader who is an Ayatollah, who is a religious cleric. So religious cleric, and we saw these state-sponsored, these Islamic regime-sponsored mourning with women in black chadors, just their face view. You can only see their face in this very austere covering. That's state-sponsored. That's the minority. Now, we don't have polls for the Iranian people, but they're very active on Twitter. There's a Farsi Twitter, a Persian Twitter, basically the same language, just some people prefer it saying Persian.
And what are you seeing on the Persian Twitter?
They're reacting to our reporting, saying, thank you. You got it right. When we say they're not against God, but they don't want to bring this God into it because this God is an oppressive God that puts them in jail, assassinates their family, and tortures. They want a nationalistic, secular government with the legacy of the Persian Empire, culture, and art. So on some newspapers today, you'll see the state-sponsored, quite scary looking to some people, regimists out in mourning. But behind that, on social media, when they can get the messages out, yes, there was celebration. Yes, there was thanks to President Trump. Real jubilation. And now people are locked down, trying to get through this. You know, heavy explosions, targeting the IRGC, targeting the leadership. How deep will the U.S. go in terms of succession? We're not clear. But if one person said, if they don't topple it by the end of the week, it looks like we will have a new leader announced, this man, Ayatollah Ali Rezi. But we don't want to get ahead of ourselves right now.
Okay. Who is this potential successor that the Iranian regime could name? And what's the clinchpin? What needs to happen for a collapse? Is it the IRGC weakening? Is it a certain key political figure being killed in a strike? Who's keeping it all together?
Which is the key question. And right now, there is a constitution. Article 111 puts this 3-person interim government in. These are regimists. They're oppressive. There's one very veteran leader who was in the Iran-Iraq War, Ali Larijani. But we're not hearing from him, but we know this is in the works. Then it goes to something called the Assembly of Experts. It's approximately 88 religious clerics. Now, what they do is they appoint this supreme leader. There's only been 2 since the Iranian Revolution. The third person would be Ayatollah Ali Reza Arafi, most likely. And we'd have to look for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to splinter and to defect, and that's what we're watching for.
How high is the bar for that, quickly?
It's pretty hard.
Yeah. They seem resolute. I mean...
But we don't know yet.
Okay.
It's heavy bombardments.
Thank you so much, Kourney Kealy. We so appreciate your thoughts and all of your reporting from people on the ground.